Governor Kristi Noem. Hi, Kristi. How are you?
I'm doing great, Glenn. How's your morning going?
Well, a little banking collapse thing, but
I know.
You have any thoughts?
Well, I tell you what, we're in tenuous times here with quite a few different situations, threats at the national security level, financial level, and people's basic freedoms.
It is coming faster and faster every day. Let's first. Can we just talk? I've got a lot of things I'd love to talk to you about, but
sure.
Let's make sure that we cover this. You just vetoed a bill, and you don't do that very often, do you? Is veto kind of rare with you?
It is pretty rare. Usually, I have one or two every legislative session. I've had several already this session, which is strange. I've never had a veto be overridden, which means every time I've vetoed a bill, the legislature has read my reasons why, looked at the policy, and agreed with me. I'm hopeful they will on this bill then, too. This is a bill that it was over 110 pages long. It was sold as an update to the UCC, the Uniform Commercial Code, and something we just needed to adopt to be in federal compliance and put a rubber stamp on. It was interesting. It didn't get introduced until halfway through our legislative session and went through pretty overwhelmingly through the House, ended up in the Senate. And when I started reading it and digging into it with my policy team, the Senate was extremely upset that I expressed concerns.
And why were they upset?
Well, I think, South Dakota is a smaller state. They had the same folks up in committee testifying from the Banking Association, from financial institutions. South Dakota's the best state in the country to have a credit card company, to have a trust. Financial services is our third largest industry here. So they are used to seeing the same familiar faces come up and sell policy. The interesting thing about this bill is that it has a section in it buried in the bill that talks about the definition of money, and it specifically says that CBDCs are allowed in the future when it comes to digital currency, but any former definition of digital currency would be allowed to be discontinued or not recognized. It specifically is paving the way for a government-controlled digital currency, should that be adopted, and should be alarming to every American. After what we've seen the last several years with the federal government being willing to trample on people's freedoms to control them, I would think them coming out with a definition of money that allows them to control your assets would be extremely concerning. So I vetoed the bill. I'm hopeful that the legislature will agree with me and they'll become educated on the actual policy that's wrapped up inside of it and really understand that it's a threat to the American dream.
When will that go back to the legislature?
We go back into legislative session in a little less than 2 weeks for one day. It's called Veto Day, and that's when they consider the vetoes that I have put forward, and they either choose to sustain them, agree with the veto, and the bill would go away, or they would override me. I can do style and form vetoes as well, and I also have the budget yet that I have to look at and decide if that's going to be something that'll move forward. So
you need people to call in a couple of weeks, or should they call now?
I need them to start calling now. I think that a lot of legislators didn't read this bill before they voted on it. It was a pretty extensive piece of legislation. They also, did not really understand the threat that we're seeing, especially now with the financial crisis we see going on. And then also we saw the credit card companies recently come out and say they're going to start coding gun purchases separately and tracking them. For me, it's a direct tie to the federal government saying that if we don't like what you're purchasing, well, then if you're using digital currency anytime in the future, we can control your access to your dollars in order to even purchase what we like or don't like.
Exactly right.
It is something that is, everything I look at is setting precedent for the future, and this is paving the way for federal government control over people's personal dollars and assets.
So just call your state house. If you happen to be in South Dakota, call your state house. I will tell you that what Kristi has done here is extraordinarily brave. She is standing up against a very powerful industry, as you know, today, definitely not bailouts happening through the Fed. today. They're very, very powerful, and a lot of these legislators and senators listen to these guys and trust them. And you really need to speak out and let them know you are not for anything that paves the way for a central bank digital currency, especially when that's the only thing defined as money. Very bad.
Glenn, specifically, this bill is being proposed in many other states. I think there's probably 20 other states that are talking about this policy. So even the more that people pay attention and bring awareness to it, we need to educate people in other states, too. I think that's one of the main reasons for chatting with you today, too, is to let my people in the state know what's going on. But also, we're the first legislative session, I think, to complete its work in the year. And we're always the first ones to kind of deal with these kinds of bills and have to veto them or sign them into law. If people can pass them in South Dakota, they know that makes it easier in other states. So we're often the battleground here. And we did make the right decision here in South Dakota. And that I hope these other states are paying attention and we educate those folks, too, so they don't go ahead and adopt these without really thinking about the consequences.
Well, I got a phone call, I think maybe it was Friday, that said, I've got good news and bad news. And I said, yeah. And they said, the UCC bill in every state is dead. And I thought that was the good news. And he said, no. I mean that all of the advances we had made last week, the banking committees and all of the people that were for the UCC just descended on all these state houses and talked all of these guys out of stopping this in their state. So I said, what's the good news? Kristi Noem, she vetoed. So you were the only bright spot there, and I thank you for that. But you have to call your state legislature and say no on the Uniform Commercial Code changes. No, absolutely not. It is the authoritarian tool that is required to control absolutely everything in your life.
Well, Glenn, the one thing that people should know, too, is that there's no rush on this. It doesn't get enacted until 2024. So a lot of what their testimony was is we need to hurry up and adopt this. It's fine. Don't worry about it. But there's no rush. We should have a full debate on the policy. If people have concerns, we should be able to talk about them. And if they don't, we should give them time to be educated, make wise decisions, especially in light of what we've been through the last several years.
So I am back to the same place I was in 2008. Nobody is prepared for what's coming. Nobody is prepared for what's coming. We are going to see a crash of biblical proportions, and all the things they said in 2008, it'll shut down the global economy and everything else, is on our horizon at some point. It has to. We just can't get out of this trap we're in now. And we have definitely not a TARP bailout, but the Fed is covering everything, and the Treasury is guaranteeing everything for these banks that went under. There are people that say, absolutely not, we cannot do this. Others are saying, again, the same thing they said before. We have to, or this chapter is over. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, listen, I'm much more focused constantly on problem solving and making the best and wise decisions looking into the future. So I do think we have economic financial crisis coming our direction. My job is to protect my state as much as possible. So we have a extensive briefing that'll happen this week with all of our banks and institutions, gathering as much information as we possibly can. I think that if anybody is looking to the federal government to help secure their future, they should stop fooling themselves right now. Any kind of bailout, anything that this federal government's going to do is not going to shore up your life, your livelihood, your finances, or your family. It is time for people to start. Yes, it is time for people to start taking personal responsibility for themselves and their neighbors and churches to start getting engaged and involved. People don't have to feel like they've lost their foundation. It's just we put it on the wrong thing. Everybody has been looking for the government for all the solutions, and that is how this world has got tipped on its ear and why we're so unstable right now. So, yes, people should be wise and plan for the future and start looking for a better place for their foundation rather than this government, because this government is only coming to steal your future.
Last couple of things. One, our Treasury Secretary was over in Ukraine. I think it was last week, wasn't it? What are we doing in Ukraine?
Yeah.
What is happening? Why is Hillary Clinton over there today? What is this?
We've spent more money there than we have securing our border for the last 5 years, and it is a corrupt regime. Just the history of Ukraine is that, we can't be certain of how they're spending all these dollars that we're sending them, and their track record is not great. So I understand pushing back on Russia. And using financial sanctions certainly is a helpful tool, although we've relied on it too heavily, and we've had a weak foreign policy the last couple of years when it comes to Europe. And so I do believe that it is time for us to wake up and understand that Ukraine has some issues. We need to put America first again and start focusing on what we do, and that it shouldn't be to the detriment of the American people. I don't know what the plan is. We've never had this president articulate a plan for Ukraine. He's just reacting and in that way digging a bigger hole for us in the long run.
We're talking to Governor Kristi Noem. Last thing, are you at all considering throwing your hat into the ring for 2024?
No, I'm focused here right now, Glenn. I do think this country needs a leader that makes tough decisions. I don't know who that is yet. So I know all these people personally that are talking about it. I always get a little nervous about people who spend their whole life dreaming about being president. Most of the time, I think they're the last person you should want to be president. So, I wish we had a guy who could speak like Ronald Reagan again, or a woman who could speak like Ronald Reagan again, and somebody who actually cared about what our founders gave us. Because if we lose this country, where do we go?
Yeah. So good to talk to you, Kristi. Thank you so much. Governor Kristi Noem, please, in any red state, call your legislature now and say no to the UCC bill. No, it cannot. Be Gandalf. You shall not pass.